They did a good job kind of setting up this for dinner or something like that. Oh, yeah.
No, I was in the and this girl like.
I thought it was. That's kind of cool to put a bunch of stuff like that in there. All right, everybody, what are we doing on Monday? Registration, you were doing something. And I will have class while they're doing that, so we have kind of dueling things going on.
Okay.
You can decide what's more important. Meaning me, of course.
How was this super special?
So, and so about that, so the test will be on Tuesday. So let's go take your notes out and let's get to it. Do we get to experts? What was the rebellion in China called?
The box.
Who did Japan defeat in a war that kind of surprised everybody? Russia. And what was the name of the policy to let everybody equally exploit China? The open door. And where did the United States engineer a revolt against Colombia? Panama. Yeah, so we covered a lot yesterday. A lot of stuff went on. Did we get it? So we got the experts. Did I mention a little bit about social Darwinism? The idea of like somebody on top. Did we get into this? Any monopoly?
We got to.
Technocrats. So we got the technocrat. Let's go back here just one sec. And don't forget, what kind of people made up the progressives? What were they? Middle class. They were benefiting but fearful of revolt. So all the professional requirements and like almost every college degree you can think of is going to come out of the progressive movement. And so you really think about the humanities, where you have history, political science, which is government, sociology, how societies function, economics, etc., are going to come out of the psychology. At first was humanities too, and that's still controversial. It's in the social studies department here today, which is funny. But professional requirements like bar exam, actually going to medical school, things like that. But there was an element of social Darwinism too, because once you say that expert's in charge, what makes somebody an expert? They have a certificate that says they're an expert, maybe a degree. Does a degree make you smart? It could be, but a degree makes you good in schools or having the money to go for college. And so there's an element too of then you must obey these people on top. And so there will be this element. They thought there'd be experts as the technocrats running the government, and that doesn't always happen. The point is this can be complex. We all like the idea of having experts do it, but I'll tell you from personal experience. I know some people who have master's degree and PhDs that are rockheads, morons. And one of the smartest persons I know, for reasons how things happen, didn't get a high school diploma. And it's which person was I describing? You don't have a master's degree. Yeah. See? You like high school so much. Yes, and I've had people, with a master's degree ask me, and I'm not making this up, and I've told you this once before, why we teach English in here and not American. But just because you have a certificate doesn't make you smart. And just because you don't doesn't make you dumb. And you have that element of social Darwinism. I mean, there's one important thing about all of you. You're smart. You're very smart. But you also know how to go to school. You know the game. You know how to do well. And that's a part of it too. Next, number three, they're anti-monopoly. Over 4,200 companies. And that wave of mergers after New Jersey changed the law and allowed for holding companies. 4,200 to 250. That means more monopolies and more concentration. And that's just getting more and more condensed to this day. And so we already know what monopolies do. They restrict competition. And there's something else. Monopolies will lead to more monopolies. Once you have a monopoly in one area and that's allowed, it becomes easier to have other monopolies. Or you have holding companies that have become monopolies in many different places. Standard Oil will kind of do that. And here is the idea of standing up to these Goliaths, the monopolists, and that's supposed to represent Teddy Roosevelt. And these are like J.P. Morgan, And Standard Oil, boy, Rockefeller's going to get more and more monstrous as he got older and the cartoonists had less sympathy for him. But we already talked about what monopolies do. Next, regulation. And regulation, we talked about regulatory bodies like the ICC to control railroad abuses, price discrimination. Well, they said only the government has the power because government makes the rules. Government makes the rules. And so only government has the power to regulate business, to step in. And so progressives believe to control, or they would say file down the rough edges of capitalism. How do you do that? By creating a universal law, some set of standards that nobody could go under. I'll give you a couple examples in a second. So the idea being, regardless of the size of your company, you all have this minimum standard so the big can't undercut or put out substandard products, whatever it might be. So for example, wages or quality of goods, you can have some kind of standard with the idea no one can go below and therefore undercut, drive competitors out, or whatever it might be. That was the whole idea of the minimum wage when it finally came about in 1938, even though the minimum wage hasn't gone up in what, 16 years and nationwide. And so it's kind of worthless now as a measure. Montana has its own. States can go above the federal minimum wage, but technically can't go below. That's why they're anti-monopolies. The idea is that some kind of floor, some kind of standard saying certain companies can't be too big. So enforce the Sherman Antitrust Act or SATA and maybe strengthen it, which we'll get to. Jump the gun. So there are a couple different views towards regulation we have to get to. Because remember capital competition, and that's why I had you read the jungle. And there's organized business interests. I just thought that part was funny. So views of regulation. There are two different views, but let's get to the issue why regulation, the whole argument. What's capital competition? Every company is trying desperately to take control of their market. That means trying to cut costs as quickly as possible and drop prices. Everybody's doing it. And what are easy ways to cut costs? Product safety. To make a product safe, that's really expensive. It is. It's a lot cheaper to put out garbage. Or think about it as manufactured goods get more complex. Use components within the product, substandard ones that you never know it's substandard until it breaks. You never know. Until somebody rear ends your Ford Pinto and it blows up and burns everyone alive. They use substandard gas tanks and they're rear-ended into them. That's fire. The Ford Pinto. You ever heard of the Ford Pinto? I still see a case. There's one. Somebody's driving one. A Ford Pinto. Yeah, when those would be rear-ended, they would just catch fire, burn everybody in the car alive. I should add, Ford knew about it. And what did they do when they found out that the Pinto would burn alive?
When they changed it so that they could make more money.
Look at it a different way. They didn't change it. They kept it secret so they could keep the production going because that was cheaper. So it finally came out that they could. Took about 9 years. Yeah, Ford Pinto was always considered like the worst, most dangerous vehicle ever. It's not anymore. Do you know the most dangerous vehicle? It's all Teslas, but the big truck thing. What do they call that? And they're death machines. Yeah, they're significantly more deadly than the Ford Pinto. I never thought anything would be worse than the Ford Pinto. I've ridden the Ford Pinto. Moving on, bad working conditions. That's cheap. To have unsafe working conditions or have like the line move faster, that is cheaper. And so the point is, in competition, there is an incentive to put out bad products. You can get a competitive advantage. And the whole point is, can you get away with it? What was it? The Remington 230 rifle had a bad habit of just firing on its own. This was just for fire. And they resisted any changes on this for 15 years. Somebody in Montana was killed by this. junior high students cleaning, we're gonna clean their gun and didn't know it was loaded, set the rifle down and it just fired. Which I would see as a defect. But they kept making. But back to this. There's an incentive to do this. And that's what the progressives are saying. We know that the incentive's there. Let's put a flaw. The argument against them was laissez-faire, conservative economics. And their point was let the market decide. There's going to be bad products, but if you regulate, that will stifle the competition. And so that will stifle innovation is what I meant to say. It will stifle innovation. So their slogan is everyone's third favorite Latin phrase, caveat emptor. Does anybody know what that means? Buyer beware. It's the responsibility of the buyer. Here's a cartoon talking about this. Seeing is believing. You're gonna buy a horse, and are you sure the horse is healthy, kind of thing. But because they could shine them up and make them look real nice, but what's on the inside? Horse stuff. But talk about him. And the whole idea is this: in a competitive market, if you buy a product from something and it's inferior, what do? You not only don't go back there again, you tell your friends, and nobody looks back. And so what happens? That company is either going to lose business and go under, or they have to change. And that's caveat emptor. Or for that matter, same deal with innovation. Buyer beware. If you're going to keep buying the old one, or are you going to buy the new one? I'm going to buy the new product. So it's up to the buyer, and then the market will adjust. And this works in a way. And I'll give you examples. This is one I bet you've had this experience. I know I have. You ever go to a restaurant and have a bad meal, bad service, something like that? Do you go back? Maybe, but a lot of times, no. I mean, my wife, all it takes one bad meal, will not go back. Period. That's it. No matter what. So what do? We tell our friend that place is terrible. Don't eat there. And they got to adjust. And that happens. And I bet all of us have been something like that before on one side of that. And so it does work. But what's the problem? Laissez-faire needs what to work? Now it's not very simple. You're gonna you have two people selling you food, and one, delicious looking food, and the other one looks like that Slim Jim cheese whiz thing I showed you earlier. We can see it and know which is good or bad. But most products, do you know if they're good or bad? That's why I had you read The Jungle, because of prepared or processed food. You have no idea what goes into it. None.
I know what's in this bread because my dad made it.
I'm not sure the flour was fine. But probably. But the point is you have no idea. So you have no idea. And I should add, it is cheaper for the customer not to know. They fought, the food producing companies fought so hard to keep ingredients out. In fact, it wasn't until the 1990s that they had to put most of the ingredients. They don't put them all. Well, there's stuff in there you don't know what. You would be surprised how many bug parts, rat feces, or peanut butter. Because they say they can't keep it out. And I eat peanut butter almost every day, so I understand that. But it's a living thing. It's hard to keep out. You don't know. They don't put that ingredient on there. But you have no idea. Can't see it. But think about it, we start getting even more complex. Do you have any idea what's on your phone? You have no idea. You just use it and hope for the best. You jump in the car, do you know what's going to happen? I need to do it. Some of you might know a little bit more than that, but a modern car, you have no idea. You're just kind of hoping that the person who put in the brakes wasn't hung over them. That's basically what it is. So we have to trust somebody else. So if you don't know, how can you make decisions for caveat emptor? You get my point? So what do you need? Where do you have to have? Transparency. And will there be transparency? Almost never. Almost never. You never know. But it is kind of a fascinating thing. that my guess is almost all, if not all of us in travel phone. And we have no idea. No idea. Just roll the die. All of us, myself included. I'm probably a little, I'm pretty wary, and I bet some of you are, and try to do your best to control, but we still are gonna be vulnerable. What else you need? What if there's a monopoly? And let's say you get a bad product, where do you go? I will go to another place. Well, you have two choices. And they're both bad. What do you do? Caveat emptor only works if there's competition. You ever got that? It does not work if there's monopolies. Period. It doesn't work. And oligopolies act like a monopoly. Remember I showed you that big chart of just the few companies that own almost all the labels, food labels. We go to a grocery store. I mean, think about it. You get bad ones that go to someplace else, they're probably made by the same people. So it does, that is the issue about laissez-faire. Let the market decide, but there are a couple of problems. And so that steps in with the progressives. We regulate and give everybody an even playing field. Therefore, we have a competition. Therefore, hopefully, the costs will remain relatively stable. Prices, quality, wages even will go up if there's competition. All of this will be ensured. If you don't allow someone to drop their standards so low it drives all their competitors out, more competition, or avoid monopolies. That is the main progressive argument. And their point was, or else something worse will happen. Either we'll become basically one, or a country controlled by one company, and therefore kind of like a fascist state, or communism. And they kept saying this, or else. Revolution is coming. Revolution is coming unless we do something. Of course, you should remember the ICC was going to regulate railroad rates. It's going to be filled with railroad. So that is going to happen. And those experts they thought would regulate could be corrupt. But those are the two different arguments. Laissez-faire, progressive. So laissez-faire, that is conservative. So today, conservative politicians, they believe in no regulation. Let the market decide. Caveat emptor. And that's what's happening now. Regulatory bodies are not going to do anything in the next 4 years. Now you can say that's a good thing. That will create more business growth, or it could lead to, well, we'll see. Why a point. But social justice. Teddy Roosevelt talked social justice all the time. Another way to look at that is social welfare. And the question for him is, we have a moral responsibility to each other, morality. You can't just do whatever you want with your property, AKA you can't do whatever you want to get money. There has to be some kind of standard that we say that community is over profit in some cases. So Roosevelt and the progressives, his idea of progressives would be capitalism is good. Capitalism creates wealth, creates innovation, but you can't do whatever you want to get rich. It depends on who it hurts. For example, there was a real worry about gouging essential services. And by 1905, railroads were essential services. Another example will soon be electricity. I'll give you one that's a real issue in some states today. Private corporations owning water. Water is an essential service. Could they gouge? They can and do, unless they're controlled. And so, also, to promote the general welfare is in the Constitution. And so the general means all, the commonwealth, the commonweal, or good. Now, I gotta be clear, progressives are gonna differ greatly about what limits this means and what this means. Not everyone's going to agree. The point is, you can go beyond laissez-faire, is what they believe. And how do you achieve this? As they saw, the general welfare would be best achieved by creating a larger middle class. If you have more middle class like these reformers, there'll be less chance to revolt. And that would be the essence of Roosevelt's liberal economics. The bigger the middle class, more people will be vested in the system and not wanting to go away. Therefore, less chance to revolt. And this revolt could be both ways. It could be the socialist anarchist revolt, whatever it might be, or fascism, authoritarianism. If more people feel like they're part of the middle class. And you can really see this in the era of liberal economics from the 1930s to the 1980s. The middle class in the United States grew fastest it ever has before since. And I got to be clear, that's the world I was brought up in. What's the middle class doing now? Shrinking. Shrinking. It's more working class people, more of their income to survive. And this kind of insecurity leads to, well, I don't know if you've noticed this, we have a very unstable political situation in the United States. Have you noticed we've gone back and forth between parties? Who's going to be in power, back and forth, back and forth. And it's a radical difference. And over half, or the biggest political identification in the United States is independent, whatever that means. Yeah, I think partially because people are feeling less secure. There's other things going on, but it's less secure. Next, democracy. So they thought, let the voters decide. They also thought people would vote progressive. Don't forget, that's what the early Democrats thought too. So it doesn't always happen that way. And they would get rid of corruption in voting, like the political machines. There's boss tweeds. So these are what the progressives hope. But they're not uniform. You can't paint them with a single brush. I mean, there are progressives who believed in more worker rights and were also intensely racist, who wanted women's suffrage and still thought women should be subservient to men. Completely. My favorite birds. Look, everyone, there's a flicker. They can see. I'm going to front off. You can get some fun though. That's me being relatively cool for across the hall because you know, so have windows. Yeah. 15 today?
No, it's just,
Oh,
that feels pretty low for the semester.
so you must have been.
You should be in civil.
So muckrakers were these. This isn't a characteristic. This is a new head or a new thing. Muckrakers. These are reporters, journalists, writers who expose corruption, especially in monopolies. Most famously, Ida Tarbell wrote about Standard Oil, and in McClure's magazine. Have you ever heard of something called a magazine? Well, I know it's another one of those things. It's very weird to me that magazines have disappeared, which I think is very sad. Also, Jacob Reed would write about a lot of the poor that bottom in New York City, forced to live in substandard housing with incredibly high rent. Once again, there's so many comparisons from the 1890s, early 1900s, and today. It's just kind of amazing how many people were without a home in the 1890s, just so close to today. Just one of those weird things how history echoes. And lastly, Upton Sinclair was no muckraker. He was a socialist. But his Jungle, the book would have the same effect of exposing what corporations were doing, but especially it made the progressive argument of regulation for everybody. Look what you're eating. We should control it. Or Sinclair would say, I aim for their hearts. Stop. So muckrakers, now this was originally an insult. Muckrakers were guys in the mines who would like clean out the debris in the tunnel, the muck. It was meant to be an insult. Teddy Roosevelt called them you muckrakers. But then they kind of took it as a badge of honor. There's so few journalists today that it's kind of weird to look back at in relation to the number of how big of the country is. Used to be a lot more newspapers and journalists. So we have access to lots of stuff, but it's all the same stuff. So local progressives tried it at first. And their big move was nonpartisan, no political elections, AKA get rid of the political machines. If there's no political parties in local elections, what will the machines have? most of the big machine controlled cities never did this, but a lot of cities would have nonpartisan elections. Can anyone think of a city that has their city elections that are nonpartisan? I can think of one. It's called Helena. Helena's election are nonpartisan. The idea would be you just vote for the best person. Of course, that's easier said than done because this might shock you, but everybody running for office is going to say the same thing. They're the best person. So there's some flaws with this. They also changed the form of government. Before they had the city council or city mayor, city council, sometimes a council might be called a commission. Same thing. And the mayor is like, so you have the city mayor, city council. That's what I meant to say. The mayor is like the executive. The council is the legislature. It switched to a city council, city manager. And the city manager is an appointed position. This is one of those, the executive will be an expert hired by the city council. It's actually a master's degree in public policy. You get a master's degree, you become a city manager. A good friend of mine from high school in Miles City, a friend of mine, is the city manager in Columbus, Ohio. That's a big deal. Columbus is what 1.5 million people, the biggest city in Ohio. That's pretty amazing. Hard job. He loves it, but God, that would be hard. But it's an expert. The idea being, we'll take it out of politicians' hands, the running of the city. Now, of course, that doesn't mean you're going to have a competent city manager. Penn's competent, my friend, but it's kind of funny. My brother lives in Columbus too, so he's can a lot. My brother is just retired. He was a professor of Ohio State. So back to this. What's Helena? Mayor, city council, city manager. Helena. Did you know this is Helena? Tell me you live in it. Some of you don't. 2 years from there. You know. This is Helena, city council, city manager. There is a mayor, but the mayor is just a member of the city council. Basically the person who organizes the meetings. The mayor has no real executive function in council. There's a city manager that's hired by the city council.
Who's our mayor? Isn't it still the?
Yeah, Lamont Collins, yeah, good guy. And so, but the mayor has a little bit of power, but the executive functions, the day-to-day running of the city is the city manager. Next, state level. Wisconsin would be like a training ground for progressive reforms. Their governor and then Senator Robert Lafayette was a progressive Republican, and he, like here's using that for trust. Robert Lafayette. So he's the most famous progressive. Wisconsin's a very interesting state when it comes to this. But they wanted election reform. The idea being if they could reform elections, that would get more people voting and get rid of the problems that are here. So the first thing would be the Australian ballot. The Australian ballot. And it would be first done in the British colonies and in the Australian continent. This was before there was any idea of having like one Australia. That's a secret ballot and a standardized ballot. So the idea of voting in secret. Next, a referendum. A referendum is a law. It starts in the legislature, the state assemblies, and then goes to the voters. For example, the state of Montana, it's by the Constitution. A sales tax, it's a referendum. The legislature has to vote for it, but then it goes to the people. Montana state legislature cannot vote for a sales tax. And even though, for example, basically the Republican Party is very pro sales tax. The governor is very pro sales tax, but he's made it clear, don't even try, because it will lose so badly. The last time sales tax went up for a vote was 41 years ago, and it lost 70-30. That's a landslide against the sales tax. Sales tax is a big tax cut for wealthy. That's kind of fits with conservative values. An initiative is a law. It starts with the voters' petition and then goes to the voters. We have a lot of Montana, a lot of initiatives every election. The biggest initiative in the last election was a vote to confirm abortion rights in the United States, in Montana, which passed overwhelmingly last election. the assembly right now trying to curtail what the people voted for. It's interesting how this happens, but that's a little internal politics. A recall. That's an elected official removed from office. It's like an initiative. It starts with the voters and they vote them out. That just hasn't happened in Montana in almost 100 years. It's pretty rare. Another one would be direct primaries. Voters from each party would pick their nominees. Not the elites. They always called it the elites would mean in smoke-filled rooms, AKA, or all, not AKA, but because they're all smoking. Well, I've got some flicker. You know what a flicker is? Like a big wood pen. So, what it meant would be, no longer will the elite decide who the candidates would be. The Republican or Democratic nominee will be decided by the voters. Montana would do this pretty early. Now, every state does this for their local and state level elections. It wouldn't happen for presidents until 72 for the Democrats and 76 for the Republicans, which really isn't that long ago. And I'm not a fan of primaries, but I like some of these, some don't work. Not every state has these. Montana has all of them, every one. Some states have almost none, especially southern states. A lot of southern states don't have this. And a lot of these are trying to be curtailed. The legislature every year in Montana tries to curtail the initiative. So what were the results? Of all these reforms, they mostly failed. Remember interstate commerce? That always found a way around any kind of progressive regulation. And how about voting? Well, voting went down. And despite, Roosevelt, like, periods breaking in the muck, it didn't quite happen that way. It went down for two big reasons. Number one, parties declined in influence. That was the goal. But if parties decline in influence, how do you know who to vote for? How do you know what somebody stands for? If you don't have parties, you go from being part of a large body that has influence on politics to one of billions of free agents. And what power does one voter have when you have a country of 330 million? And so that took away the power. People didn't know who to vote. Voting numbers went down dramatically. By the 1970s, they were lucky to get 50% of the eligible voters to vote in a presidential election. It would finally go back up to about 67% in 2020, but it went back down to about 62% in the last election. And so a lot of people just don't vote. The parties got people out to vote. The parties gave you an ID. If you don't know who they are, well, the party kind of told you. Two parties makes it difficult. Stuck with that, with winner take all. And there's something else. Who steps into the void? Special interest groups. And the most important special interest groups have money. And therefore money becomes more important. If the parties lose influence, money becomes more important. We've already talked about in 1896 how money is going to become more important. And who are the most prominent special interest groups? Business groups and the very wealthy. If we're now at the point where we can have a few just individuals, they have so much money, they become a special interest group on their own, just one person. We could have one person that could dump $300 million in the presidential race in a month and a half. That same person now is dumping $1 million to just change a state Supreme Court race in Wisconsin. They just dumped $1 million, which in a small race like that could turn the tide. Money becomes more important than ever before. My guess is you probably know who I'm talking about. So, what about the National Progressives? So the National Progressives, and that's from the 1912 elections, Teddy Roosevelt's president, remember? And now Roosevelt, his first couple years as president, Hannah was scared, but not a lot happened. But in 1904, and I put down the date 1904. 1904, Roosevelt's going to unveil he's a Republican, but his progressive platform, and he called it the square deal. I'm going to give you a square deal, fair and square kind of thing. Very clever, because he gave it a slogan where you don't really need to know what's in the program. You can just remember the slogan, I'm for the square deal. And other candidates would follow this. Most famously, kind of by accident, his cousin would have the New Deal. Harry Truman would have the Fair Deal. Then they ran out of deals. Eisenhower had dynamic conservatism. Kennedy, the new frontier. Johnson, the Great Society. Nixon, new federalism. Ronald Reagan had Make America Great Again. So what? But think what a slogan does. You don't need to know what they stand for. You just stick to the slogan. It's been incredibly effective today. In fact, they have a whole, like the movement, which is the Republican Party, called Make America Great Again. Its slogans are really effective. And I will say that both Biden and Harris had terrible slogans, AKA nobody remembers it. So the slogans didn't work. Slogans, you gotta have something you can stick to. But back to this. That all popped up. But I put it in italics because of this. It's the populist program from 1892. So you already have this in your notes. Progressive income tax. Remember all this stuff? So you can write it down again, but you've already written this down. Progressive income tax, Social Security, and old age pension, regulation like antitrust and consumer protection, 8-hour workday, child labor law, women's rights. Every single one of these was in the Omaha platform of 1892. So Roosevelt did not go much different. The idea is control business. You see that picture on the right. One additional piece that the populists believed in but didn't write was conservation and reclamation of arid land, aka most of the Western United States. Roosevelt was a conservationist. The term environmentalist did not exist. But he believed in protecting what we would say the environment today to use it later. 97% of the forests of the United States that existed in 1776 had been cut down by 1900. So he was talking about we had to save this. To his personal point of view, he wanted to save forests in the environment because they had animals he wanted to kill. So we have to save them today so we could use it, aka kill it tomorrow. So it's a little more complex one. Reclamation, same deal. We have water running to the sea. Let's save it by damming it in reservoirs. So it is the beginnings of environmentalism, but it's different. That's a square deal. And this goes completely against the big money of the Republican Party, who were conservative. But in 1892, 1904, Roosevelt won a sweeping victory. The Democrats picked a guy who's even more laissez-faire than the majority of Republicans. They picked a corporate lawyer named Alton Parker. Remember, they had William Jennings Bryan, and they did a 180 and went pro-corporation for Parker. And Parker was a disaster. He wasn't even an elected official. He only got votes in the South because there's no Republican Party in the South. So it's a sweeping victory for PR. But the reason business leaders gave Roosevelt money is they assumed either he really didn't mean what he said about the progressive platform, or they can buy him off. We'll buy it off. And Roosevelt took their money. And then did what? He meant it. And pushed for these progressive populist programs. Not well. He was not very effective at getting laws passed. He was great at putting on a show, but getting laws passed is a different function. But conservatives were furious. And with aid from big business, they stifled this word. Conservative Republicans, conservative Democrats stifled it. The only real victories he had was in conservation. And, was one was conservation. The Forest Service was created, the Park Service was created, the Bureau of Reclamation was created, and that would try to conserve water in the arid West, aka build dams. The Reclamation Project, the Reclamation Act would be the biggest dam building program in America. It was a damn big program. Now, most of the dams would ironically be built in the New Deal under its cousin, but it's part of the Reclamation Act. So if you go to Canyon Ferry, there's a plaque on one of the sides that says Bureau of Reclamation, even though it was built during the New Deal. The Hepburn Act was another achievement. That would strengthen the ICC. That was a big deal. And lastly, his other big victory would be because of, ready? The jungle in Upton Sinclair. When the jungle came out, this gave fuel for the argument to regulate food. There's a couple, this is one of my favorite covers, the jungle. That's the original poster board and cover for the jungle. And there's Sinclair. He would do another one about oil and other industries, but they were onto him by then. So it was harder for him to get his information. But because of the jungle, that led to two important acts. The Pure Food and Drug Act, which created the FDA, an administrative body to look into food and drugs. I should add, it only affected exports. Companies actually wanted this. Why? Because European importers of American food were getting mad at the low quality. So they wanted some kind of regulatory body so they could tell Europe, we're not giving you poison. Thus, that's why I have only export. And secondly, it also looked into patent medicines. This was an era where they had all these patent medicines, basically these snake oil salesmen who are literally selling stuff sometimes called snake oil, that these cure all things. And they would put any chemical they could find in you, kind of smell chemically, they'd say it would cure you. And also a lot of weird electronic devices you put your body and shoot electrodes through. They're really scary. And so, for example, one of these patent medicines would be, let's say you have a baby, a child. They're not children, right? They're really small and scary, but really small. They're very scary. When they teeth, they can't sleep. You know what I'm talking about? So that thing, one of them was called Mother's Little Helper to help a child with their teeth. Anybody know what was in Mother's Little Helper? Heroin. And so you dab a little heroin on their jaw and they just go right to sleep. There are other ones that would be 100% alcohol. Just give a shot of that, no more teething problems. What was the doctor in Dr. Pepper? Heroin. Coca-Cola had cocaine. That would be the look into that, even though Dr. Pepper saw heroin in some parts of the US in the 1930s. Also, the Meat Inspection Act to poke, smell, and look at meat to see if it's good. That's still technically the law. There's a little bit of biological testing, but the FDA is so underfunded and now it's basically not functioning that we'll see what happens. But these were two successes. But in 1908, conservatives are going to make sure Roosevelt cannot run again. There was a panic in 1907, not as bad as 14 years earlier, but they were not going to let Roosevelt run. So he did one of these, I don't want to be president again. I've done what I wanted. He did want to be president again. And William Howard Taft would run for president for him. Taft didn't want to run. Roosevelt kind of coerced him. Taft was more conservative. He would break up more trusts than Teddy Roosevelt, who was called the trust buster. He would break up more monopolies, but he was mostly laissez-faire in a lot of things. The Democrats did another 180 and brought back William Jennings Bryan. Only the third. Taft would win even a bigger victory than McKinley won back. Taft was president. But Taft did not push for an 8-hour working day. Taft really didn't care about women's rights. Taft did not promote the Forest Service. In fact, there was a big scandal where they're selling off national forest land of this brand new Forest Service. And Roosevelt was furious. And in 1912, Roosevelt jumped into the race again. So when boxers, and Roosevelt was a boxer, when boxers would go around the country and try to make money, they would set up a quick ring. And they would say, all right, we'll take on any comer. And you would, to say you would go fight the champ, you would throw your hat in the ring and step into the ring and get pummeled. But, and this is bare knuckle boxing, so potentially killed. Yeah, boxing was like a death solver. Not quite as deadly as American football was. Darn it, they changed the rules. Someday we'll work on the flying wedge. I'll show you how you can casualties. But Roosevelt threw his hat in the ring, made that very famous statement. Thus, his hat in the ring. But at the Republican convention, conservatives had their revenge. And they made sure that Taft got renominated. Actually, Taft didn't want to run again. Taft wanted to go home. Actually, he wanted to be on the Supreme Court, which he would eventually make it on the Supreme Court a decade later. But once Roosevelt blamed Taft for everything, Taft wanted revenge. So Roosevelt was not renominated. Remember, this was before the Constitution was changed. The president can run for as many terms as the president wants and still be elected. So he became the standard bearer of an obscure third party called the Progressives. Remember, third parties don't do much. Winner takes all here. Roosevelt announced he would be their candidate. And then when he was asked, how do you feel, Mr. President? There were stories about illness that would come out later. But Roosevelt liked to beat his chest. And so he said, how do you feel, Mr. President? And he said, I feel as fit as a bull moose. Thus, it became known as the Bull Moose Party. And he called his program New Nationalism. And it was the square deal, but even more. It was much more left, or as Roosevelt would say, liberal. And he adopted many socialist ideas. He was not a socialist, but he adopted these ideas, including basically government takeover of the railroads, government takeover of telephone, government takeover of electricity. Roosevelt went all in. But now that the Republicans are split, and the Democrats can nominate, they can nominate just a sentient being and probably be elected president. This is like 1860. Remember, Lincoln won because the Democrats were split. They nominated a very well-known progressive, Woodrow Wilson. He was the governor of New Jersey, but he was actually born in Virginia, became a professor in Princeton. And his progressive program, New Freedom. And it was very similar to Roosevelt. So now you have a progressive Democrat with the Republican split. One more candidate. Please do the right slide. Jump right to this. The socialist. Eugene Debs jumped into the race. Debs is going to take away votes from others. Oh, wait. And Debs is going to jump in the race. And he's closer to the progressives too, and he took away votes from TR. So all Wilson had to do was run. And Wilson would win. Oh, that is made up. If you ever see that picture, there's no pictures of him riding a moose. They did old school cut and paste of like Taft on an elephant and Wilson on a donkey. And Wilson won. We're jumping right there. Green are the Democrats. Because the Republicans were split, Wilson even won Taft's home state of Ohio. Now we got it. Well, we covered a lot.
Can you go back to the Democrat slide?
No. Everyone got Wilson won, and he would be progressive, but also flawed. Here?
Yes.
Is that it?
No, I need one more.
This?
Nope.
This?
Yeah, I know, right?
I need the Democrats, Wilson, and then what he was.
I'm sorry.
No, you're okay. Yes, thank you. Thank you.
I covered a lot, I know. Goodbye, everybody. Enjoy the minor flooding this weekend. Oh. Goodbye, everyone. Sorry, I went through a lot. We should be basically ready for the test.